First of all, just like to welcome you all to this webinar today. Thanks very much for joining us. As you can see, I'm not Danny Clark. My name is Charlotte Cork, and I'm the product manager on Simply People. So I work closely with Danny, who's the founder, who some of you may already know. Just to give you a very brief intro about Simply People, Simply People is connecting a community to improve the physical and mental health and well-being of employees in the workplace. So we're the fastest growing occupational health and well-being community in the UK. We help organisations who need occupational health services to find the right provider first time. And employers who aren't sure, we also offer a free independent triage service to help them navigate the territory. Supporting occupational health providers is also a key part of what we do, and that includes providing a range of support for the community, including lead generation, skills development, and of course hosting events like we are doing today. So today's seminar is about, webinar rather, is GDPR, cybersecurity, and the role of the DPO in healthcare. Just a few housekeeping notes before we get started. If you have any questions during the presentation, please can you type them into your GoToWebinar control panel question box, and then I will collate those and we can have a Q&A session at the end. And there's also a separate chat box if you want to use that to communicate with us or with the participants. So today's session is delivered by Nick Richards and Yogesh Agarwal. Nick is a qualified GDPR practitioner and certified information privacy professional. Nick holds data protection officer roles in organisations within various sectors, including healthcare and charity. Having been in business for 35 years, mostly at board level, Nick brings a pragmatic approach to data protection and tries to demystify what can be seen as highly complex legislation. Yogi is a highly qualified risk and security professional, accountant, and certified fraud examiner. He believes that information security should act as a business enabler rather than a jargon-heavy, compliance-orientated subject. He's worked with clients across technology, fintech, public sector, defence, and electronics. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Nick to introduce the rest of the webinar.
Right, well, thank you, Charlotte, for the introduction, and welcome everybody. I'll just quickly run through the agenda for this afternoon. Firstly, you're probably all well aware of the GDPR and hopefully all fully compliant, but I thought it's worth a bit of a refresher and a recap on the regulation, and in particular about defining personal data and why it's so important that we protect it. I'll touch on what the legislation calls special categories of data, which is highly relevant, obviously in the healthcare and occupational health sector. And then I'll talk a bit about data protection officers, what they are, who needs them, what they do, etc. Then Yogesh will do the more interesting part of the webinar and talk about information security, including what technical controls can be used to protect data, the importance of device and network security, a bit about data breaches and cyber attacks, which are on the increase at the moment, and also what certifications are available to companies to demonstrate their compliance to third parties. So if we can have the next slide, please. Now, this is an old joke, but I think it does help to illustrate the fact that our personal data belongs to us, and therefore, at least strictly speaking, Facebook and the like might not agree, but strictly speaking, it should be up to us what people do with our data. Next slide, please. I thought I'd just mention Brexit because obviously after the end of the transition period on the 31st of December last year, we became a third party under the GDPR. And now the UK government has brought the GDPR into UK law as the UK GDPR, which is supplemented by the 2018 Data Protection Act. And there are a few things we need to do following Brexit, such as some minor changes to documentation, particular privacy notices, which probably still refer to the European GDPR. Although if we've got customers overseas, there could well be lots of other things you might need to do. So what is personal data? Personal data is any information that either on its own or with other information can identify a specific living individual. For example, John Smith is probably not personal data, but John Smith, who lives in number 14 Acacia Avenue, Swindon, is personal data. It can even exclude a name, so it could just be the tall chap with wears a turban and has one leg who lives in Acacia Avenue, Swindon. Could be personal data because there are probably not that many people in Acacia Avenue, Swindon who fit that description. So it's anything that could identify a living individual. And processing is basically anything we do with data. So this includes collecting data, storing data, sharing data, even deleting it is processing. And to process data, we must have a lawful basis under Article 6 of the GDPR to do so. And we must be able to demonstrate and communicate our lawful basis, which is normally in our privacy notice, but also in our records of processing that we need to keep. In healthcare, we'll also be processing sensitive information such as health data, which is known as special category data under the GDPR. That's health data, genetic data, biometric, etc. And in order to process this special category data, we're required to demonstrate a lawful basis under both Article 6 and under Article 9 of the GDPR. And these lawful bases have to be included in our privacy notice so that we're telling people under what lawful basis and conditions we're processing that data. Article 6 offers us options such as consent, performance of a contract, legitimate interest, and others such as vital interest. Consent is difficult in occupational health, and we could probably run a whole webinar on the issue of consent and occupational health because there's so many different aspects to it. But consent is not advisable in terms of general processing operations in occupational health because consent, in order to be valid, has to be freely given. And there's generally an imbalance of power between the data subject, employee, and the controller, generally the employer. And therefore, it's difficult to argue that the consent has been freely given. So normally in occupational health, we would use the performance of a contract because there's normally a contract in place, or legitimate interests. And legitimate interests are the most flexible, probably, of all the Article 6 lawful bases, and can be used as long as there is no imbalance between the legitimate interests of the data subject and the legitimate interests of the controller. And there's lots about this on the ICO website. So can I have the next slide, please? So just to remind us why all this is important, here are a few reasons. And breaches and fines are not uncommon in the healthcare sector, with fines often being quite large. Home and remote working has increased the number of breaches and cyber attacks, which, to be honest, were already on the increase. I've been aware of 2 companies I know that have had major ransomware attacks. One of them recently had to pay £1.64 million in order to get their data back. So this is why it really is important to protect our data. And this is something that Yogesh will be obviously talking about in detail a bit later on. But there's a number there, both inside and outside of the NHS, and I can assure you that the ICO, despite coming under the umbrella of the government, doesn't take prisoners and doesn't give any favours to the public sector, I can assure you. So next slide, please. So personal data in healthcare. I mentioned that in order to process sensitive special category data, we need a lawful basis under Article 6 of the GDPR, which I touched on, but we also need to fulfill a condition under Article 9. And Article 9, paragraph 2, H offers these options under the heading of health and social care purposes. So we can meet the condition if we're processing for the purposes of preventative or occupational medicine, assessment of the working capacity of an employee, medical diagnosis, provision of health care or treatment, provision of social care, or the management of healthcare systems or services, or social care systems or services. And the last one is really for the public sector, mainly the NHS and social work. Under the Data Protection Act 2018, which supplements the GDPR, Schedule 1 offers or provides some safeguards that need to be in place. And we can only use these conditions under Article 9 if the processing takes place under what they call the responsibility of a healthcare professional. And a healthcare professional actually is not described in the defined in the GDPR, but it is defined in the Data Protection Act. And it includes, not surprisingly, doctors, nurses, midwives, osteopaths, chiropractors, dentists. Interestingly, physiotherapists are not listed. But note it says under the responsibility of, which or bound by some kind of legal duty of confidentiality. So you may want to use consent to share a report with the patient's manager or request records from a GP, but you can use this condition under Article 9H, 9 paragraph 2H, for the general sort of processing of data under occupational health. So if you're an OHA, then you're fine because you come under this list of professional, medical professional. If you're a technician or somebody in a more assisting role, my own view is that you're still covered because you're still probably under the responsibility to some extent of a health professional, because probably somebody would be overseeing the work that you're doing. That's my view anyway. Can we have the next slide, please? So here's a bit of a checklist to make sure that you're complying with the regulations, to make sure that you've checked the processing of special category data is necessary for the purposes we've identified, and are satisfied that there's no other reasonable and less intrusive way to achieve that purpose. Generally in healthcare, that's a difficult one because normally you are processing special category data and there's no way around it, but it's always worth just checking. We've identified an Article 6 lawful basis for processing the special category data, and we've also identified a condition under Article 9. And in both cases, we also need to communicate that in our privacy notice. Where required, we've also identified an appropriate Data Protection Act 2018 Schedule 1 condition, which is what I just referred to. So that's under the control of a medical professional, or under a duty of confidentiality or code of conduct under British law, so English law. So that's another opportunity to provide that safeguard. We documented which special categories of data we're processing. So in our register of data processing activities, we've listed all the different special processing. Where required, we have an appropriate policy document in place. That's something that's required under the Data Protection Act, but very unlikely that you would need to use it unless you're in the NHS or in social care. We've considered whether we need to do a DPIA. It's a data protection impact assessment, which is required if you are processing data that could be of high risk to the rights and freedoms of your data subjects, or if you're embarking on a project, maybe a new IT project, merging businesses, that kind of stuff, you would need to do a DPIA. We've included specific information about our processing of special category data in our privacy information for individuals. That's the privacy notice. And if we're using special category data for automated decision making, including profiling, we've checked we comply with Article 22, which talks about profiling and automated decision making, which is unlikely unless you're a sort of major corporate, I wouldn't have thought. And also we've considered whether the risks associated with our special category data affect our other obligations around data minimization, security, and appointment of a data protection officer or representative. If we're doing business in Europe, for example, we would need to appoint a representative in Europe. Next slide, please. So data protection officers, DPOs, do you need one? We need to appoint a DPO if we are a public body. So all public bodies, pretty well without exception, are required by law to appoint a data protection officer. We're also required to appoint a DPO if we're processing special category data on a large scale. A large scale is not defined in the legislation, but the ICO recommend appointing a DPO if you're sort of close to the line in terms of large scale. What they say is that almost all GP practices, for example, would need to appoint a DPO. If you're a single partner practice, you probably wouldn't, because on a month-by-month basis, you're probably not processing large scales of special category data. In my view, all occupational health companies, providers should appoint a DPO. And the ICO also recommend that you should consider appointing a DPO on a voluntary basis, even if it's not mandatory, because it's good practice and it shows your clients that you're taking privacy and their privacy seriously. And if you decide not to appoint a DPO, you do need to document your rationale for the decision, which just needs to be a simple document, but something that you keep on record under the accountability principle to show that you've given it consideration. So what does the DPO do? A DPO will ensure that controllers and data subjects are informed about their data protection rights, obligations and responsibilities, and raise awareness about them. DPO will give advice and recommendations to the organization about interpretation and application of data protection rules, and obviously rules change, they're updated. So a DPO will keep you informed as to what's going on in terms of regulation, and also guidance, which again is updated regularly by data protection authorities. A DPO will assist with or provide internal staff training. Staff training is mandatory. It's mandatory under the GDPR. All staff involved in processing of data must be trained, and a DPO will help to do that or do it for you, and also do refreshers from time to time. Help to create a register of processing operations, which is mandatory again, and notify the ICO of any that present specific risks. Ensure data protection compliance within the organization and help them to be accountable in this respect. assist with data protection impact assessments where they're required. DPO doesn't normally do the DPIA, but they will oversee it and sign it off. Help with breach reporting. Sometimes they will do the breach report if it's needed to report it to the data subjects and also to the ICO. I just generally handle queries and complaints. Hopefully you won't get many of those on request by the organization or data subjects, customers, employers, etc., employees, and draw the organization's attention to any failure to comply with the applicable data protection rules. It's important that a data protection officer, let's say working with an occupational health company, would have access to senior management and is able to hold them to account. And that's why quite often it's better to have an external DPO rather than a member of staff. Okay, so my last slide, you'll be glad to hear. So a final bit of advice: start with the checklist, which is available on the ICO website. Go through that, tick it off. Assess whether you need any professional advice, which could be from a lawyer or from a data protection consultant. Decide whether you need to appoint a DPO, and if not, document your rationale for the decision. And also ask yourselves whether you can achieve all of these requirements by adopting a data governance framework, which Yogesh will talk about. But having in place a data governance framework and certification is a great way to demonstrate to your data subjects and your customers that you take data protection very seriously. So on that note, I will stop boring you with legislation and hand over to Yogesh.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. There is a question on the question answer session, and Paul, what we are going to do is we are going to take all these questions after we quickly finish the information security section. So I hope you are enjoying the sunshine today wherever you are. It's quite bright and sunny outside, and after this webinar, I'm definitely going out to take a stroll. I started my career auditing the IT infrastructures of corporate giants with PwC, and I now run RightQ. It's a small but fast-growing security consulting company. I run it under the direction of my boss, who also happens to be my wife. In the last 18 years of my career, information security has graduated from good to have to must have, and the whole thing has moved from being a pastime for some very intelligent geeks to now being a full-time job of organized crime gangs, and these gangs are funding drugs, weapons, brothels, and all other illegal activities. So on your screen, you're seeing some questions and statements that I hear almost daily in my day job. We have by design excluded the people who agree with the last two statements because they are not with us on this webinar today. Let's start with something that is much closer to our homes and heart, which is our emails. I don't think businesses can survive without emails in your day-to-day life. And phishing is the most effective attack method that's used by cyber criminals, and it would normally include a very well crafted email with a prompt to action. It will always have a call to action asking you to do something. And trust me, things have really moved ahead from the previous versions where you would receive an email from some Nigerian prince who would want to share a portion of his wealth with you. The newest attacks are very well researched, they are targeted and quite hard to resist. All the personal data which we are giving to LinkedIn, Facebook, websites, and everything else on the internet is the fodder for such research. Now, if you look at a typical phishing message, There are many vulnerable people who will still fall for the emails that claim that you are a winner of a lottery or you have an inheritance from a long lost aunt. Also, the attacks where people are receiving emails asking for help to move money from, say, Saudi Arabia bank account to somewhere in Western Europe, and you'd be surprised by the fact that people are still falling for these kind of attacks, providing their bank details, even transferring large sums of money to these people. The one bit which we see very commonly is receiving an email which you have been expecting, and this is generally because of breached databases on the internet. For example, if Tesco is breached and they have released the information of your emails, etc., on the web, criminals get handle of it. And then what is happening is, because they now know you are a customer of Tesco, they would send you an email crafted as an offer from Tesco to buy some stuff, which you, if you click, is now going to take away all your personal information. A very common one, having a problem with your account. It could typically come from, say, Microsoft, because most of the businesses have started using Office 365. It comes from Gmail, all other services that people are using. Normally, it would be an email saying that you have lost, you need to reset your password, or you need to re-authenticate with the system. And what it would do is it would take you to a forged site. It will look as if you are logging into Microsoft or Gmail, but then what it is doing is harvesting your credentials. With again, with all this home working, all people working from the remote locations, not being in office, there's a lot of transfer happening online with files, again using Dropbox, Box, SharePoint, and in fact even emails. And criminals are taking advantage of these things by crafting very intelligent emails, uh, making you believe that these files are something that you should access, you should open. And once you have opened the file, what it would do is, in the background, it will it will install some malicious programs on your computer, probably a keylogger, which is literally taking away information of each key that is being logged. Again, one of the common ones. So HMRC and very recently NHS are one of the most loved organizations by these criminals. We are seeing fictitious attempts for online refunds, tax inquiries, warrants, things like pandemic relief payments, requests for COVID tests, track and trace, invitations to get vaccinated, and all such methods which are being used to obtain personal information, bank details, user IDs, passwords, NI numbers, and whatnot. I mean, very recently, I was surprised to see an attack which was around uh, 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 requests to get vaccinated. So basically, a text message saying that you have been requested to attend vaccination. And when you click on the link, the first thing it is asking is to provide the bank information so that you can be validated. Moving on from computers, as our lives have started revolving around our mobile phones, links in text messages, automated caller announcements, and fictitious voice calls are also becoming very common. The goal is very clear: either to get a foothold on your device, which is, by example, clicking on the link, downloading a malicious app in the background, which is harvesting your data, or simply, if it is not possible, getting your credentials, getting your user IDs, getting your passwords, getting all the personal information that they can get in order to get into your online digital lives. Well, again, there are loads of stories around what can go wrong, but the question is, how do we protect ourselves? And this is, again, let's start with how do we protect ourselves individually. So if there is just one takeaway from this webinar you would want to remember, it is two-factor authentication. It's a combination of something you know and something that you have. Passwords are easily guessed. They are available in breached databases, and most likely you are using a single password across multiple services, or one password with changing the last digit or changing the last special character, and probably you've had that password for like 5, 6, 7, or even longer years. A second factor, it can be a hardware token, again very commonplace with the banking services, where they give you a token which has some numbers that you need to punch into your keyboard before you can gain access. Text-based authentication, one of the most common ones, where when you are logging in, the service is asking you to enter a text message that is sent to your mobile phone. And for people who are more tech savvy, they can start using those authenticator apps. So there are common apps available from Google, from Microsoft, from Duo. What they would do is they would generate a random number which is synced using time to the server, and it will only let you into your account if you are entering the correct number. Now, most companies worth their salt should offer multi-factor or two-factor authentication. What I would really request you to do is to look into your account settings, look out for two-factor or multi-factor authentication tabs, and get these set up. The easiest one, set it up using your phone as the second method, which is using text. And if you are more security conscious, scanning those barcodes on your phone, getting a proper authenticator app is one of the more secure methods to implement multi-factor authentication. I hear a lot about people saying that this is an inconvenience, but trust me, I've seen people cry in my office because their digital lives were ruined because of these account compromises. I recently dealt with a fraud case where someone got into the personal tax account of an individual and tried to claim £67,000 as tax credit uh, from the government, claiming that their business was affected by COVID pandemic. This is again very interesting. If you have not come across this word before, it's called pawned. And pawn literally means that we have taken control, we have gained ownership. And this is an exercise you can do even now. So I've put in two links in this slide. If you look at the first one, it says haveibeenpawned.com. What it offers you is a sneak peek into all the breaches that have happened in the past, and it tells you whether your emails were compromised in those breaches and whether it also included your passwords and any other personal details. Now, these sites, the ones that I have put here on the slide, are quite safe and secure. It will be worth an exercise to use, say, your most common email IDs that you use, enter them onto this site on the email tab, and see whether your email accounts, whether your passwords appear in any of the breaches that have happened in the past. Again, please use your chat window, question answers window uh, to just share the information. I mean, again, we don't want to see your email IDs, but it will be interesting to see how many people actually had their accounts breached and their passwords available. If there, if you find your emails are there, your passwords are there, again, the first thing you should do is change those passwords, and change those passwords everywhere where you might have used them, because there's a technique called password spraying, where once they get hold of one password, they will use the same user ID password combination across hundreds of sites to get a successful hit. Now, this is on the personal level. I believe that this is where the security starts, but let's now start looking at what organizations can do to protect themselves. A recommendation would be to start with the security baseline. I'm not sure if you've heard about the Cyber Essentials scheme. It's a very simple but very effective government-backed scheme. The government is promoting this scheme to make sure that the organizations are secure. It applies to organizations of all sizes, including a one-person company to a self-employed person to companies with thousands of employees. And it covers a whole range of very common cyber attacks. Covers things like network security, access controls, the admin controls on your devices, secure configuration, where you're making sure that your device itself is not vulnerable, it is password protected, patching. So I'm hoping that no one in this session is still using Windows XP machines or Windows 7 or all those outdated versions. And if you're using devices, these are being patched regularly. On the technical front, this is the most secure way to defend your systems. So patch as much as you can. And of course, the anti-malware controls, where you would have a good antivirus, good control on your web behaviors, and good control on the links and emails. Now, for Cyber Essentials self-assessment, it has been kept deliberately a low cost. So the cost is £300, offers a cyber liability insurance of up to 25K. There are hundreds of certification bodies who are offering this certification. All these people have been trained by NCSC to offer these services. I mean, again, it's a very, very straightforward business case to actually look for it, research, and apply for a Cyber Essentials certification. If you want an audited version, there is also something called Cyber Essentials Plus, where an independent assessor comes and then audits you against that standard. Again, something that I would highly recommend that you look at, and if possible, try and attempt to gain this certification. This is a very busy slide, but this is just a snapshot from the NCSC, that's National Cybersecurity Center, which highlights the 10 steps to cybersecurity, again, designed for small and medium enterprises. So things like network security, covered in Cyber Essentials, malware protection, secure configuration, managing user privileges, already covered in Cyber Essentials. On top, there are things like user education and awareness, making sure that people can identify all those phishing emails, making sure that they are not giving away too much personal information or company information. Controls over removable media, the USB sticks. Home and mobile working, again, a very, very big topic and very relevant in the current context. Are the devices which are being used at home working secure? Are they properly segregated from rest of the home networks? Is there proper monitoring in place? So guidance available in the public domain by NCSC. There's no reason we should not be looking at it and following all these principles. For slightly larger organizations where governance is important, I would also recommend looking at something called ISME governance certification. So this is information assurance for small and medium enterprises. Normally it's in the industry known as little brother of ISO 27001. So whereas ISO 27001 is quite document heavy and very expensive to maintain, difficult to obtain, this is a light touch version, again designed for small and medium enterprises, and it would be worth looking at this if as an organization you are looking to improve your overall IT governance. The good thing is it already includes Cyber Essentials, and it also includes the GDPR requirements. So the topics that Nick covered before me would more or less be covered by opting for this certification. Again, at the very base level, it is designed to be a self-certification scheme. The cost is very nominal. We are talking £450. Hundreds of certification bodies available across the country who can help you achieve these certifications. The topics that would be covered are asset management, cloud services like Office 365, third-party risks, where, for example, you are sharing data with an external third party, user training, business continuity, what happens if one day everything is ransomware, you're not able to log into your systems, and effective backups. And backups are important. Just sharing my personal example. So I changed my phone PIN code to a very complex one, and within half an hour, I forgot. And the security said that after 5 attempts, the phone will be wiped. So literally my whole phone was wiped. But then my phone is backed up every day. So what it meant was the only data I lost was last 4 hours because the whole phone was backed up. And this is just to highlight that backup is not just, for example, your core database. You should try and build redundancies for various systems that you may have, including, for example, your emails, including your customer data, including your systems that you are using to provide the healthcare. Now, on that note, I believe I've covered everything that I wanted to in this session, and I would want to stop showing my slides and open up the forum for questions and answers. You can of course note down our emails in case you would want to reach out to us. And yeah, we'd be happy to answer your questions and queries. So with that, I'll end the slideshow, start my camera, and happy to take any questions.
That's great. Thanks very much, Yogi and Nick. A really, really interesting session. So yeah, so we have had a couple of questions in, I think. So just bear with me 1 second. So Paul Winfield has asked, is an employee entitled to view and agree to content of their own occupational health report following a consultation prior to it being passed to an employer?
That's a very interesting one, because in theory, yes, because it's their data, as I said right at the beginning of my slides. If you look at the GMC, they say that that they have a right to look at their report. If you look at, I think it's ACAS say that they don't have a right to look at it. If a occupational health professional doing a health assessment needs to get medical records from the GP, then they need to get consent from the employee, and the employee has the right to look at those records before they go to the for the health assessment. The issue then is, which is, I guess, the second part of the question, is that sometimes if in a health assessment the employee will disagree with something that the health professional has put, in which case it's very difficult. ACAS says that you should discuss it and try to agree it, but I think the only thing you could probably disagree, the employee could probably disagree with, is factual information rather than a medical diagnosis or a medical opinion, because in my view, if they got the name wrong, or they've got something that the employee said at the assessment during the assessment was incorrect, they disagree with it, that's fine, that could be amended. But if they said, I think this guy has got X illness, RSI or whatever, and needs further investigation, then I think it would be difficult to disagree with that. I don't know if Yogesh, if you have a view on that.
Yeah, and this is again a very common question which is asked, and I'll put it in a wider context. So if you believe that employee is being unreasonable in asking for the data, and that it's not being asked specifically for the purpose of getting their personal information, but with a view to take, for example, a revenge on the company or the service, then you can always deny that request or ask for more context.
Great. Okay. Just
Yes,
to let
because
you
I
know,
don't think. Sorry, I was just going
carry
to
on,
say
Nick.
I don't think a health assessment report qualifies under the Access to Medical Records Act, 1988, which gives essentially patients an automatic right to access their medical records. I don't think a health assessment from an occupational health advisor meets that criteria. So I think the jury's still out on that. I don't know if the questioner has an opinion on it.
Paul, I don't know if you're able or would like to respond to that at all. I think you should be able to unmute yourself, hopefully. I have, I'm not sure whether, because we're all three of us are organisers, whether we all need to do that. Nick and Yogi, could you just check in your panel? There should be a microphone button in the attendees section that you can say unmute all participants. And then I think that means that everyone should be able to then unmute their microphones. I don't know why.
Good afternoon.
Oh.
Paul, great. Oh, is Paul there? I thought you were there for a moment.
Hello. I think I'm there now. It's just I think when somebody else cut me off and then you got muted again. I'll stop talking.
That's probably me. So did you have an opinion on this?
Yes and no. It's just a really difficult situation at present, and it seems like a bit of a minefield when it comes to personal data and who should have access to it, and to be able to justify having access to information. Very impressed by Yogi's part as well. That's again, wow. People don't realise what's out there.
Quite scary, isn't
it? It is. Well, it's potentially a very scary place in which we live in. But you go down the same rabbit hole as driven by fear. But no, so a really good webinar. It's just I'm experiencing some difficulties at present, and I cannot say very much more than that, unfortunately. But thank you very much. It was a thorough answer, two different perspectives on the question itself. So thank you very much.
Great. Okay.
Thank you for the question.
Yeah, we've got a second. It's more an observation, I suppose, but perhaps a question embedded within it from Amanda Sharkey. She's saying that 7 data breaches identified by Have I Been Pawned? Interestingly, none since 2019.
And this is again, I believe each attendee might want to check their emails and multiple emails, work emails, personal emails, etc., because there have been so many large scale breaches, and there's millions of user ID and password combinations which are available out there. And what is happening is People are exploiting this human tendency to not change their passwords. So what will happen is you have selected a password, and maybe it's your pet's name or your kid's name or whatever, and you have created some combinations where you have changed your A to @ and I to 1, and you think that now my password is very secure and very complex. But the thing is, there are tools and algorithms which already identify those patterns, and those machines are very, very powerful. So like for a 8-character password with no special characters to be cracked, it takes less than 10 minutes. Right? If someone is really intent on getting those passwords, it will be not very difficult. And what the point that it is none since 2019 is great, as long as you have changed the passwords since 2019 and are not reusing any old passwords. Given that on an average, again, we find that every user would have at least 30 to 40 as a minimum logins to different internet services, it is critical that we change the passwords wherever we think we might have used the same password. Again, I recommend my clients to use password managers. I don't know whether people have started using it. So basically what happens is it's a secure vault which is on your machine, on your phone, where you have to remember one master password, but it is a repository of all your other passwords, and they will generate machine passwords which even you cannot remember and you don't need to remember. So it is a very good idea to have those password managers. They're not very expensive on a person. I mean, some are quite free. People sometimes are skeptical about the security of the password managers themselves, but we have not seen any password vault being breached so far. There have been a couple of instances where in one case the password management company, the company which produces password manager, was breached because people were trying to attack it, but they could never get hold of people's individual passwords. So again, a very good step in improving the security. Multi-factor authentication must have. I would not go to internet on my key services if the services are not under multi-factor authentication.
Great. Thanks, Yogi. And there's another question coming related to that from Lorna, who's asked, is there a password manager company or website that you would recommend?
I mean, again, as a consulting company, we take this deliberate approach not to recommend products because we are not affiliated with any single product. I can give you a few common names which are out there, and then what you can do is you can do some research. So the common ones are this company called 1Password, with 1 as in the numeral and password. There's something called Dashlane, which again offers passwords. There are a few free ones out there as well. If you are an Office 365 user, very recently Microsoft Authenticator has started giving their own password managers. So again, and that you don't have to pay for it if you are using Google Authenticator as a multi-factor authentication. So there are quite a few out there. It's more on a user's choice in terms of first is the cost. There's some difference, probably 50p to £1 per month on these services, and also the usability, the look and feel of it. So I guess yeah, sorry, I wouldn't be giving you a single name.
It's okay. I use Bitwarden, which have you come across that, Yogi?
I haven't personally come across it, but then again, if it is a password manager, if yeah, I mean, any decent password manager is better than not using a password manager.
Yeah, sure. It's slightly nerve-wracking having all your eggs in that one basket, I think.
I think that's what makes people nervous, isn't it? If I lose my password, then I lose all of my passwords. What people think. But I must say, when I'm looking at a new technology thing like this, I also tend to look up reviews from some of the tech sites, because I think that's always a good, if it's one of the reputable technology review sites, that's usually a bit of a seal of approval.
And just to give some context, I mean, we are increasingly seeing the death of passwords, and I hope it comes very soon. So, for example, if you're using modern versions of Microsoft, they've started what we call Microsoft Hello, which is again leading to a zero password regime. Similarly, for the high security industries, we recommend like hard tokens, where it's not a password. You have a small key which you use either wirelessly or by pushing it into the device to authenticate, which is a physical token not requiring your passwords. Um, uh, for HSBC has this voice recognition system where it recognizes your voice patterns to get you into their accounts. iPhones and including Android devices, again, Face ID recognition leading to what we call a no password regime. Just one caution that I would advise is that if you are using something like Face ID and Touch ID, back it up by a secure PIN. So you might be using a Face ID, which is great, but then don't back it up by a PIN which is 111000 or your date of birth or something. Make it a bit more discreet.
Yeah, great.
And Face ID is the real pain if you're wearing a mask.
Oh yeah.
It is, yes.
Bit more tricky. Great. Well, unless there's anyone else with any more questions, I don't think there's any more that have come in. So I'd just like to thank Nick and Yogi again for a really, really interesting session. And just to let you all know that the webinar recording will be available via the website in an hour or two once it's processed. But thanks again for attending today's session. I hope you enjoyed it, and we might meet again soon.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay.
Have a great day.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
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 Thanks, everybody. Thank you.